I stood there with the invitation list in my hand, and when my own son looked me in the eye and said, "Your name isn't here," it felt like a blade cutting straight through my chest. Betrayal has many forms, but nothing prepares you for being erased from the very family you built with your own hands. That single sentence shattered years of sacrifice, turning love into silence and belonging into exile. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I am 72 years old, and my name is Martin Cole. People who pass me on the street would never imagine that I carry more than a battered back and the look of a man who has spent his life around steel and machinery. For decades, I worked as a maintenance manager at a plant on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, the kind of job that keeps your hands calloused and your eyes trained on equipment humming late into the night. When the company began shutting down its lines and my back finally gave out, I retired earlier than I expected. What most people saw was an old man living in a modest brick house on a quiet street, alone since my wife passed away 16 years ago. What they could not see was the hidden scaffolding of my life, savings, trusts, and a patent that had quietly changed my future. Adam, my adopted son, was 4 years old when I brought him home. I remember the paperwork, the nervous smile of a boy who had been passed around too much already, and the way he clung to my coat like he feared I might vanish. His presence gave me purpose after my wife's death. I raised him with every ounce of discipline and devotion I had left, waking early to pack lunches, fixing his bikes, making sure he had what he needed to stand taller than the world expected. He was bright, eager, and curious, and I thought that if I poured enough into him, he would never know the kind of fear or uncertainty that had shadowed his early years. I made sacrifices, but I also made plans. Few know that during my years at the plant, I designed a conveyor safety lock. It was simple, efficient, and after the paperwork cleared, it became a patented design. The royalties still trickle in like a quiet stream. Years earlier, a friend pulled me into Rivermont Logistics when it was just a small shipping company. My stake was small but steady. Those two decisions created a financial cushion I never flaunted. To the world, I was just Martin, the retired steel man who still mowed his own lawn. In reality, my lawyer, Elaine Porter, managed the Cole Family Trust and Cole Industrial Safety LLC, a shell that held patents, stocks, and properties. I wanted Adam to value people, not money. When Adam graduated college, I helped him buy a house in Shadyside. The deed carried a private note secured by mortgage, with my name tied quietly to the arrangement. He believed he was standing on his own, but I was the one making sure the ground didn't crumble. I paid more bills than he knew about, from utilities to hidden expenses, because I believed one day he would recognize the silent support beneath him. I even spoke with a former contact at Blackwood Robotics, where Adam now works in finance, and nudged him into a position that might have otherwise gone to someone else. He never asked how opportunities appeared, and I never explained. Kara, his wife, entered the picture with polish and charm. She was a marketing executive, adept at appearances, always curating photographs and captions for her followers. She enjoyed fine dining and weekend getaways, the kind of things that looked perfect framed in golden filters online. She liked Adam best when he was playing the part of the successful young professional, the man who could deliver the lifestyle she craved. I kept my distance, choosing to be polite but quiet. When she glanced at me, I often felt measured, as though she were checking whether I fit the image she wanted to project. Meanwhile, I tried to stay anchored to the values that had carried me through a lifetime of work. I gave quietly to St. Bartholomew's, the church that had held me steady after my wife's funeral. I donated to a trade program for men who, like me, had once worked the lines at the mill and needed new skills after layoffs. I woke early, still sharpening knives and fixing hinges around the house, as if ritual could keep me whole. To Adam and Cora, I was background, part of the furniture of their lives, steady, reliable, and silent. That was fine by me, or so I told myself. I never demanded recognition. I wanted only respect, a seat at the table, and acknowledgement that family is more than decoration in a photograph. Yet, as years passed, I began to sense their world revolving around something I couldn't provide. Image. They valued what could be displayed, not what was quietly sustained. I did not know then that one winter evening, those values would clash like iron against stone. I did not know that my name, the very name I had given to my adopted son, would be erased from a guest list as if I were no more than a shadow. That Christmas would mark the moment when the scaffolding I had built for decades collapsed, not because the money failed, but because the bond between father and son cracked under the weight of pride. The words, "Your name isn't here," would change everything. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of this betrayal, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. The city looked beautiful that December, dressed in strings of lights that glowed against the heavy gray sky. Pittsburgh always had a way of transforming during Christmas. The scent of pine wreaths clung to storefronts, and the bakery on the corner released its warm cinnamon air each time the door opened. I wanted to enjoy the season as I used to, but an unease pressed at the back of my mind. It began with Adam's casual comment 1 week earlier, the kind of phrase that seemed harmless but lingered long after he said it. "Christmas Eve at Rivermont Country Club this year, Dad," he told me. "It's going to be intimate, only close family." The word close caught in my chest like a splinter. I nodded, pretended it meant I was included, but the hesitation in his eyes told me otherwise. Adam was never good at hiding the truth from me. He looked away, busying himself with his phone, and I understood there was more behind the words than he wanted to admit. Later that evening, Kara called. Her voice was smooth, wrapped in false concern. "Martin, maybe it would be better for you to stay home this year. You should rest. Crowds, cold air, all that noise. It might not be good for your back." I thanked her politely, though every syllable scraped across my pride. They were weaving me out of their lives thread by thread, not with cruelty shouted aloud, but with careful words that excluded me while pretending to care. I sat alone in my living room that night, staring at the faint reflection of Christmas lights flickering in the window glass, and thought of how often I had pictured the three of us gathered around a tree, sharing warmth instead of distance. Still, I chose hope over bitterness. On Christmas Eve, I polished my old black shoes until they shone, pressed my jacket, and looped the red scarf my wife had knitted decades ago around my neck. The scarf still smelled faintly of cedar from the chest where I kept it. Wearing it felt like bringing her with me, like she could stand at my side and steady me if things turned cold. The Rivermont Country Club was lit up like a cathedral when I arrived. Families in fur coats and tailored suits streamed past me, their laughter ringing through the frosted night. I walked through the lobby with quiet dignity, my shoes clicking against the marble floor, and gave my name at the reception desk. The young woman behind the counter smiled politely, typed quickly, then frowned. "Sir, I'm sorry, but your name isn't here." I asked her to check again, calm but firm. She scanned the list once more, her cheeks coloring as she shook her head. At that moment, I saw Adam across the lobby. He looked sharp in a dark suit, hair neatly styled, every inch the image of success Kara had sculpted for him. He walked over, his smile fading as he noticed me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" His voice carried no warmth, only irritation. "I came for Christmas Eve," I answered simply. "There must be a mistake." "They don't see my name." He exhaled as though I had embarrassed him. "It's not a mistake. This is only for close family." I stared at him, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had fed with my own hands. He spoke as if we were strangers. Kara stepped up behind him, the scent of her perfume sharp in the air. Her smile was poised, professional, but her words sliced clean. "We wanted to keep the right image tonight," she said. For a moment I felt my knees weaken, but I steadied myself. I could have argued. I could have begged. Instead, I smiled, a thin line of calm dignity. "I understand," I said quietly. Without another word, I turned away from them. out through the revolving doors into the falling snow. The night air was sharp against my face, but it cleared my mind. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed Elaine. When she answered, I spoke steadily. "It's time," I told her. She hesitated only a second before replying. "Are you certain, Martin? Once we move forward, there's no undoing it." "I'm certain," I said, watching the snow settle on the pavement like ash. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked toward the street, I realized I had stepped out of more than just a building. I had stepped out of the role I had played for decades, the silent supporter, the safety net, the man who carried the weight without asking for gratitude. That night, I knew everything was about to change. If you're still watching and the tension is pulling you in, please comment number 2 below so I know you're with me. The wind cut sharp across my face as I walked away from the country club. Snowflakes stuck to my coat, melting slowly into dark patches that spread like bruises. The voices of laughing families carried faintly behind me, muffled by the heavy doors I had just passed through. For a moment, I stood under the streetlight, watching the flakes fall, and wondered how many years of my life I had given to a boy who could look me in the eye and tell me I was not close family. The ache was heavy, but beneath it came something steadier, clarity. I pulled out my phone and called Elaine. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. I told her exactly what I wanted. "Trigger the withdrawal," I said. "End every support measure we discussed." She paused, as if giving me one last chance to change my mind. "Martin, once I move forward, there is no reversing it. Are you certain?" "Yes," I replied. My breath came out in a cloud of white. Completely certain. She began to outline the steps we had prepared months earlier, steps I once thought I would never take. Auto payments for Adam's utilities, gas, electric, water, would be terminated effective immediately. The private mortgage note on his Shadyside house, one I had financed quietly behind the scenes, would be accelerated if he failed to meet the next payment. The spending authorizations tied to Coal Industrial Safety LLC, the company I used to funnel small comforts into his life, would be revoked. And finally, the quiet guarantee I had extended to Blackwood Robotics for Adams Bridge financing would be withdrawn. Each item landed like the turning of a wrench, bolts twisting free on a machine I had built and maintained for decades. My son thought he was running it alone, but I had always been in the background, oiling gears and tightening screws. Now I was stepping away. If it rattled, if it fell apart, it would fall on him, not me. By the time I ended the call, the decision had settled into me with a strange calm. Pain was there, yes, but also relief, as though I had finally put down a weight I was never meant to carry forever. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address. The ride was silent except for the scrape of wipers pushing snow off the windshield. When I got home, I hung the red scarf on its hook and stared at it for a long while. That scarf had been knitted by my wife in the last winter of her life, and wearing it had always given me the sense that she was close, that she could see the man I tried to be. Tonight, though, it felt like a reminder of promises I had made and broken, to protect Adam, to make sure he never knew fear or want. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer, as though laying to rest an old part of myself. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and 2 sheets of paper. The first letter was for Father Thomas at St. Bartholomew's. I apologized for missing the midnight service, explaining only that family matters had kept me away. I asked him to keep me in his prayers, not because I doubted God, but because I knew the road ahead would test my resolve. The second letter was for Adam. I kept it short, only 2 lines. I still live at the same address. When you want to talk as 2 men, my door will be open. I signed it with my name, not with Dad. That choice was deliberate. He had told me I was not close family. Very well, I would speak to him as one man speaks to another, without the shield of titles. By the time I placed the letters in their envelopes, it was close to midnight. I turned off my phone, silencing the buzzing that had started after Kara's earlier messages. The world could wait. I went to the front door, looked out at the snow piling on the steps, and felt the quiet satisfaction of seeing it cover every footprint leading to my house. The old path was disappearing under white silence, and with it the role I had played for too long. That night, for the first time in years, I went to bed knowing I had chosen dignity over habit. I did not know what storm tomorrow would bring, but I knew I would face it standing on my own terms. If you're still watching and the heartbreak feels all too real, please comment number 3 below so I know you're with me. The morning after Christmas Eve was silent, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. Snow lay heavy on the branches outside my window, weighing them down like tired arms. I made coffee the way I always did, measured, steady, without haste, because routine was the only rhythm that kept me balanced. The phone rang just as I sat down at the kitchen table. I knew before I picked it up whose voice I would hear. "Dad," Adam said, his tone sharp with confusion. "The Wi-Fi isn't working, the gas company says the account is overdue, and Kara's credit card got declined at the grocery store. What's going on?" I sipped my coffee before answering. "It's time to be independent, son." There was a pause on the other end, then the rustle of movement. Kara's voice came through, brittle and angry. "Don't be petty, Martin. This isn't right. After the scene you made last night, the least you could do is keep things running until we get settled." I felt no anger, only a calm certainty. "Standards start with inviting family to the table," I told her. "You made your choices. Now live with them." I ended the call before either of them could reply. The kitchen was quiet again, the ticking clock on the wall suddenly louder. I pulled on my coat and scarf and walked through the snow to St. Bartholomew's. The church was still decorated with evergreen garlands and candles from the midnight service. I lit a single candle for my late wife, whispering a prayer for strength. It wasn't for revenge I needed courage, but for the discipline to stay firm when my instincts wanted to forgive. Later that afternoon, Elaine called. Her voice was precise as always. "All authorizations through Coal Industrial Safety have been terminated. No further charges can be run through your accounts. Blackwood Robotics has received notice of your withdrawal from the bridge loan guarantee. The financial scaffolding is gone." I thanked her. "You've done more than manage money, Elaine. You've helped me draw a line." After the call, I scrolled idly through my phone and saw Kara's newest post. She had uploaded a photo of their Christmas table, crystal glasses gleaming, plates lined with roast and vegetables, every detail arranged like a magazine spread. The caption read, "A perfect Christmas with those who matter most." There was no chair for me in that frame. I stared at it longer than I should have, then set the phone down. The bitterness rose and passed like a wave. I would not fight to belong in a picture that had no place for me. The following day, Adam called again. This time his tone was less indignant, more matter of fact. "Hey, Dad, can I borrow your old plumbing kit? We've got a leak under the sink, and I don't have the right tools." I told him I'd leave it on the porch. Before I carried the box outside, I slipped in a note on top of the wrenches and sealant tape. It read, "Tools may be borrowed, dignity may not." I closed the lid and set it on the steps, letting the cold wind scatter the corners of the paper before the lid shut tight. Inside, I returned to my workshop, a place filled with half-finished wood projects and the smell of oil. I sat at the bench, running a cloth over a rusted vise I'd been meaning to restore. The act reminded me of what I was doing in my life, unfastening bolts that had corroded over decades of enabling, stripping down a machine that no longer ran as it should. Parenting had been my life's greatest work, but it had also become a structure too warped to hold. To rebuild, I had to take it apart piece by piece. That night, as snow continued to fall outside, I closed the blinds and sat in the dim glow of the lamp. There was grief in the silence, but also a strange kind of relief. For the first time in years, I felt I was no longer holding up a weight that should have been shared. My son would stumble, perhaps fall, but at last he would feel the ground beneath his own feet. And as for me, I would learn how to live without carrying him. If you're still watching and can sense the storm is only getting darker, please comment number 4 below so I know you're with me. The week after Christmas carried a different kind of chill. Snow still blanketed the streets, but the cold that crept into my bones didn't come from the weather. It came from the storm brewing inside my son's house. On the third day after the holiday, the electric company finally followed through with the shut-off notice. The house in Shadyside went dark, and the furnace stopped humming. I knew because Adam called me, his voice ragged with panic. "Dad, the lights are out. Kara's freezing. The fridge is off. Everything's a mess. You can't just let this happen," I reminded him gently. "I didn't let it happen, Adam. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine to carry." That evening, Kara vented on social media. I didn't follow her accounts, but one of the parishioners from St. Bartholomew's sent me screenshots. Kara had posted a photo of herself wrapped in a blanket, lit by candlelight, with a caption that read, "Vindictive old men should be ashamed of themselves. Families should never punish family like this." The comments poured in, friends of hers consoling her, praising her for staying strong through hardship. Not one of them knew the truth. 2 days later, headlights cut across my driveway, and Adam came pounding on my front door. His coat was unbuttoned, snow clung to his shoulders, and his breath came out in heavy clouds. He didn't wait for an invitation, just shoved his way into my living room. "You've ruined our lives over one holiday," he shouted. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight with rage. "All because we wanted a quiet Christmas without you hovering." I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, keeping my voice calm. "No, Adam. You ruined your own life when you erased me from it. I didn't take anything from you. I only stopped giving." He began pacing like a man cornered. "You don't understand what Kara's parents think of you. They believe you abandoned me years ago, that you refused to help when I was struggling in college, that you left me penniless until I pulled myself up. They think you've been a selfish old man my entire life." I felt the air go out of the room. Kara had been feeding them lies, spinning a narrative where I was the villain, the absent father who never gave a dime. For decades I had worked double shifts, hidden my financial scaffolding so Adam could feel strong, and all the while his in-laws thought I had abandoned him. My chest tightened at the realization that Kara hadn't only poisoned Adam's mind, she had poisoned the entire family network. "So, that's what she told them?" I murmured, more to myself than to him. Adam stopped pacing and looked at me, shame flickering across his face. "I didn't know until Christmas Day." She admitted it. She said it was easier than explaining why we didn't invite you, that they wouldn't question it if they already thought you were cold and useless. The truth hit harder than any insult. My silence, my choice to stay in the background, had given Kara room to write her own version of my life. "Even now," I said, steadying my voice, "you're blaming her." But who rolled his eyes when the receptionist said my name wasn't on the list? Who told me I wasn't close family? That wasn't Kara. That was you. Adam flinched. His anger seemed to collapse inward, leaving only desperation. "Fine, yes, I screwed up. But, Dad, please, you can't just let everything fall apart. The house, the job, the bills. It's too much. Help me fix it." I shook my head slowly. "I won't repair what you destroyed with your own choices. That's not punishment, Adam. That's reality catching up." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old mantle clock. Then Adam's face hardened again, as if shame had curdled back into fury. He stomped to the door, yanked it open, and let the winter air pour in. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice breaking. "When everything's gone, when Kara leaves, when I'm standing in ruins, you'll wish you had done something." He slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. I stood there, unmoving, listening to his footsteps crunch through the snow until they faded into silence. I walked to the table, sat down, and folded my hands. My body shook, but not from fear. I was steady, braced like an old machine against a storm. For decades, I had been the hidden engine keeping his life running. Now the engine was off, and he would hear for the first time how loud the silence could be. The first days of January pressed down like lead. The streets were still buried in snow, cars lined with ice that refused to melt. Each morning I shoveled my walk, the rhythm of lifting and throwing snow giving me time to think. Adam's voice echoed in my head, even when the air was still. The anger, the desperation, the warning that I'd regret my decision. My phone filled with voicemails. Some were pleading, his tone trembling with panic. "Dad, I can't pay the bills. Just help me this once, please." Others were angry, almost venomous. "You've abandoned me. You're choosing pride over your own son." The cycle repeated, begging, blaming, begging again. I listened to a few before deleting them all. Kara's message came in sharper, typed, and sent like a knife to the ribs. "You are a bitter old man destroying your son's future. When people find out what you've done, no one will forgive you." I put the phone down without replying. Words like that only confirmed I was walking the right road. One afternoon, Elaine arrived at my house with a thick envelope. She brushed snow off her coat and stepped inside, her briefcase in hand. "This is the final set of documents," she said, laying the folder on my table. "Once you sign, full title of the Shadyside property reverts to you completely. No more gray areas, no more questions. They'll either pay rent or vacate. It ends the discussion." I stared at the papers, the black ink neat and final. My hand hovered above them, unwilling to touch. Signing meant I was severing the last tie of protection. Signing meant Adam and Kara would be forced to face the world without my hidden support. Elaine hesitated, then pulled out another document. "You need to see this," she said carefully. "Kara tried to apply for a line of credit last week. She listed you as co-signer. We caught it because the bank flagged the mismatch in your signature. She was prepared to forge your name." For a moment, I felt my stomach drop. Fraud, carried out in my name. It wasn't just entitlement now, it was deception, risk, the kind of thing that could have destroyed my reputation if it slipped through. I clenched my jaw and nodded slowly. "That settles it," I said. I picked up the pen, the weight of it heavier than I expected. My mind pulled back through decades. Adam's first baseball game, the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the day I stood at his college graduation, convinced all my sacrifices had been worth it. I saw the boy I had adopted at 4 years old, clutching my coat, afraid of being abandoned again. That boy was still inside him somewhere, but the man who looked me in the eye on Christmas Eve and called me not close family, that was who stood in front of me now. Love and disappointment tangled like barbed wire in my chest. Signing these papers was not about revenge. It was about refusing to let my love be twisted into chains that bound us both. I scrawled my name on the lines, each stroke a final turn of the wrench. Elaine gathered the documents carefully, her expression professional but her eyes heavy with understanding. "I'll file everything tomorrow. If Kara tries anything further, we'll pursue charges. You've done what you needed to do." After she left, I sat alone at the table for a long time. The silence pressed hard, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood finally, opened the drawer where I kept old keepsakes, and pulled out one of Adam's college report cards. He had earned a string of average grades that semester, but I had still smiled when I received it, proud simply that he was there at all. I held it in my hand, feeling the brittle paper between my fingers. I walked to the fireplace, knelt, and fed the report card into the flames. The paper curled quickly, edges blackening, ink turning to ash. Watching it burn, I felt something loosen inside me. I wasn't destroying the memory of his childhood. I was releasing myself from the illusion that he would one day grow into the man I had imagined. As the firelight flickered against the walls, I whispered aloud, "I choose dignity." The flames consumed the last scrap of paper, and with it, the old dream I had carried too long. For the first time in years, I felt the choice was mine alone, not for Adam, not for Kara, but for me. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of this impossible choice, please comment number 5 below so I know you're with me. January sank in heavy and colorless. The snow that had once sparkled over Christmas now turned to gray slush, piled on curbs and stained with soot. The city looked tired, and so did I. I woke each morning to the same routines, but the air felt different. My decision had set things in motion, and now I began to see the ripples spreading through Adam's life like cracks in a frozen river. The first sign came when Elaine forwarded me the official copy of the property notice. Adam and Kara had 30 days to vacate the Shadyside house or begin paying rent, $2,800 a month. Elaine's letter was firm, worded without cruelty, but it was a line in stone. I pictured Adam holding the envelope, Kara standing behind him, both of them realizing the house was never truly theirs. Neighbors in Shadyside began whispering. One man I knew from the parish told me he'd walked past the house one evening and heard shouting spilling onto the street. Plates clattered, Kara's shrill voice cutting through the cold air. Adam's voice roared back, deeper but broken. Their perfect picture window now framed a storm of arguments, and the neighborhood that once admired them was watching every crack appear. At the same time, Adam's troubles at work grew heavier. Without my guarantee on his bridge financing, Blackwood Robotics had no reason to cover his missteps. His supervisor called him into the office, handed him a written warning, and told him his position was under review. Colleagues began whispering behind his back, their voices carrying through hallways. The image Adam had built, that of the polished young professional with limitless potential, was unraveling thread by thread. He was no longer the rising star. He was the man on the verge of collapse. Kara, true to form, took her battle to social media. She posted a long rant, furious and dramatic, painting me as the monster who betrayed his own blood. My husband's father has cut us off in the cruelest way. Who does that to their own child? The post spread quickly, her friends rushing in with sympathy. For a moment, I wondered if perhaps I had miscalculated, if public opinion would drown me in their outrage. But then the tide shifted. Old friends from church, men I had worked with at the plant, even Adam's childhood baseball coach. All of them commented beneath her post, quietly but firmly correcting the story. They reminded her, and everyone watching, of the years I had sacrificed, the support I had always provided, the truth they had seen firsthand. Sympathy turned to suspicion, and suspicion to judgment, not of me, but of Kara. One evening, Elaine called with new information. A journalist reached out, she said, her tone cautious. They saw Kara's post and wanted your side. I advised them you wouldn't comment, but I'm drafting a legal response. If she continues, it edges into defamation. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the dark outside my window. I had never asked for the spotlight, but now, because of Kara's lies, people I didn't know were looking at my family like it was theater. I wanted silence, but silence was no longer mine to choose. One night, restless, I drove through Shadyside. I didn't stop, just let the car roll slowly past the house. The lights were off except for a dim glow from the kitchen. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Adam, shoulders slumped at the table, his head resting in his hands. Kara's voice rose from somewhere deeper in the house, sharp and relentless. For a moment, I almost parked, almost went to the door, but then I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. This was the cost of choices, his and mine. As I turned the corner, I saw Adam again, this time stepping out onto the porch. He sat down on the cold steps, no coat, just a shirt, his breath fogging in the air. He looked small, smaller than I had seen him since he was a boy clutching my coat at the orphanage. My chest tightened, but I didn't stop. I kept driving, the tires crunching over frozen snow. Consequences are the teacher I never could be. That thought carried me home, heavy and true. The storm had broken inside Adam's house, but for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the roof up. By late January, the city felt locked in ice. The streets were slick, the Allegheny River glazed with white crust, and the sky hung heavy with clouds that refused to break. The world seemed suspended, waiting for something to shift. Inside me, that shift had already begun. I went back to St. Bartholomew's one morning, brushing snow from my shoulders as I entered the quiet sanctuary. Father Thomas stood near the altar, adjusting candles left from the Epiphany service. He looked up and greeted me warmly, as though he already knew why I was there. I confessed my turmoil, the guilt that clung to me like smoke, the doubt that maybe I had gone too far in cutting Adam loose. Father Thomas listened in silence before placing a hand on my shoulder. "Justice and love can exist together," he said gently. "But sometimes love means letting go. A parent's job is not to shield a grown child forever. It's to teach them that choices have weight. You have not abandoned him, Martin. You've given him back his life, even if he doesn't want it. I left the church lighter than I had entered. The snow seemed less oppressive, the air easier to breathe. A few days later, Elaine arrived with a final set of updates. She laid the folder on my table with that familiar precision. Everything is settled now. The Shadyside house is fully under your name. Utilities are no longer tied to you. The bank protections are secure. Legally, you are insulated. Their choices are their own. Her words carried a finality that both relieved and saddened me. I had truly severed the last strands of dependency. That same afternoon, there was a knock at my door. Kara stood outside, her expression sharp as a blade. She pushed past me before I could say anything, her perfume thick in the air. "You have to fix this mess," she demanded, her voice vibrating with anger. "Adam's job is on the line, the bills are piling up, and everyone's looking at us like failures. You've got the money, the influence. You could turn this around with one phone call." I stayed calm, leaning against the doorway. "You can't manipulate what you no longer own," I said. "I am not your safety net. Not anymore." Her face twisted with disbelief, as though she had never imagined I'd stand my ground. "You're destroying your own son." "No," I replied softly. "I'm refusing to destroy myself." She left in a flurry of snow and slammed doors, her words echoing down the street. I stood at the threshold, watching her disappear, and realized I felt no anger, only sorrow. She wasn't just fighting for comfort, she was fighting to preserve a world built on illusions, and I had pulled away the scaffolding. That night, as if fate wanted to balance the bitterness with grace, I opened my mailbox and found a letter. The envelope bore the return address of a town an hour outside the city. Inside, a young woman had written in careful script, "Mr. Cole, you don't know me, but years ago you funded a scholarship at the trade school where I studied nursing. I just wanted you to know I passed my boards this fall. I have a job at a hospital now. Your generosity changed my life. Thank you." I read the letter twice, my chest tightening. I had almost forgotten that scholarship, a small fund I'd set up in my wife's memory. Yet, here was proof of its reach, proof that when you give to people who value opportunity, it plants seeds that grow. That, I realized, was the legacy worth leaving. The next morning, I went into my workshop. The shelves were cluttered with tools I rarely touched anymore: wrenches, saws, clamps, each worn from decades of use. I pulled open a drawer, ran my hand over the cold steel of an old pipe wrench, and placed it in a box. Then another, and another, until the box was full. I called the trade school that afternoon. "I've got tools I no longer use," I told the administrator. "Better hands will use them." When I hung up the phone, I looked at the half-empty drawers and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't closing the door on Adam alone. I was opening another toward a future where my energy, my resources, and my love could flow into people who valued them. Standing in the workshop, the smell of oil and wood around me, I whispered to myself, "Better hands will use these." The words felt like a prayer, a promise, and a release all at once. If you're still watching and searching for the glimmer of resolution, please comment number 6 below so I know you're with me. By the time February arrived, winter in Pittsburgh had started to loosen its grip. The days were still cold, but the edges of the snowbanks were softening, melting into dirty streams that slid down the gutters. The seasons were shifting, and so was I. The weeks of silence since my decision had hardened into something final, and now the consequences were unfolding in plain view. The Shadyside house no longer glowed like a Christmas card. Curtains were drawn, trash bins left overflowing, and the driveway sat empty most days. Elaine kept me informed, sending me each step of the proceedings. Adam and Kara had failed to pay rent after the 30-day notice. Eviction was no longer a threat, it was a reality. Papers were filed, and soon enough, neighbors saw the moving trucks pull into the driveway. I drove past one morning, keeping my distance. The image still burned into my mind. Adam carrying boxes down the steps, his shoulders hunched, his breath fogging in the icy air. Kara barked instructions from the porch, her voice sharp enough to carry across the street. For years, they had cultivated a picture of polished success: shiny cars, designer coats, holiday parties with too much champagne. Now, their perfect image was spilling out onto the sidewalk in the battered cardboard boxes. A neighbor I recognized, Mrs. Thompson, stood at her fence shaking her head. She had once told me she admired how Adam had made it on his own. Now the truth was visible for all to see. A few days later, Elaine called to confirm that the eviction had been finalized. "They're out," she said simply. "The house is yours again, free of entanglements." As for the credit fraud, the bank recorded the attempt. "We have the paperwork. Do you want to press charges?" I sat with that question for a long moment. The law would have been on my side, and a younger version of me might have seen punishment as justice. But I told Elaine, no. Reclaiming what is mine is enough. I don't need Kara in court. I only need distance. She respected my decision, as she always had, and moved forward to secure everything in my name. The house stood empty for a week before I walked through it. Dust clung to corners, and faint outlines marked where furniture had sat. I ran my hand along the wall of Adam's old study and felt a weight in my chest. I had once imagined this house would be a sanctuary for him, a place where he'd build a life that honored the sacrifices behind it. Instead, it had been reduced to another battlefield. I closed the door and left without lingering. One evening, I came home to find a letter tucked under my front door. The handwriting was Adam's, messy, hurried, familiar. I carried it to the kitchen and read it slowly. It was half apology, half plea. "Dad, I know I failed you. Kara is gone. She left 2 days ago, said she couldn't stay with someone who had nothing. I don't blame her entirely. I drove you away too. I can't fix what I've broken, but please don't leave me completely alone. If there's a way back, tell me what it is." I folded the letter and set it in the drawer with other keepsakes. I didn't respond. Some words deserve no echo. Replying would only reopen wounds that had just begun to heal. I mourned what he had been, or what I had believed him to be, but I accepted what he was now. A bond broken by contempt could not be mended by desperation. News of Kara's departure reached me in fragments. She had left Pittsburgh altogether, disappearing from the social circles she once ruled. Someone mentioned she'd been spotted in Cleveland, working under another name. I felt no satisfaction in her fall. She was simply gone, and her absence was its own verdict. To mark the closure, I returned to my workshop. The shelves were nearly bare from the donations I'd already made to the trade school, but a few drawers remained full. I emptied them carefully into another box: hammers, wrenches, measuring tapes, all tools that had built not only houses, but the life I once tried to build for Adam. I drove them to the school myself this time. A young instructor shook my hand, gratitude in his eyes. "These will make a real difference for our students," he said. His words reminded me that my efforts could still matter, just not in the way I once imagined. On the drive home, I passed through Schenley Park. The snow was melting there too, turning into rivulets that trickled down hillsides. I parked, walked for a while, and listened to the sound of water moving again after months of ice. Standing there, I whispered into the cold air, "Seasons always change." It was both a statement and a reminder. Children grow into adults. Bonds bend, sometimes break. Love can survive sacrifice, but it cannot survive contempt. As I stood among the thawing snow, I felt something release inside me. The role of father provider, fixer, silent rescuer, that chapter was done. Ahead was something quieter, something freer. I could not change Adam, nor rewrite the story Kara had tried to tell. But I could choose how my own story continued. And for the first time in years, that choice belonged fully to me. By March, the first hints of spring began to break through Pittsburgh's long winter. The sidewalks were wet with thaw, and patches of green pushed stubbornly through the soil. The sharp cold that had gripped the city for months softened into something gentler, and I found myself walking with less weight in my steps. The world was changing, and so was I. I spent those weeks finishing the last of my workshop clean-out. Each tool I packed into a box seemed to carry a memory. Late nights repairing pipes after work. Weekends spent teaching Adam how to sand wood. The smell of metal and oil that clung to my clothes. It was more than a collection of wrenches and clamps. It was a record of years spent fixing what was broken, building stability where there was none. But tools are only useful in the hands of those willing to learn. Adam had turned his back on that lesson, and I could no longer keep them for a man who saw no value in them. One crisp morning, I loaded the last box into my truck and drove to the trade school. Young apprentices were gathered in the courtyard, their laughter and energy a reminder of what hope looked like. I carried the box inside and placed it on a workbench. A tall boy with calloused hands lifted out the first wrench and grinned. "These are solid," he said. "Better than anything we've got." I smiled, watching them swarm around the tools with excitement. For the first time in years, I felt that what I was giving away was not loss, but investment. Those tools would build new futures in better hands. It was then I realized something profound. My legacy wasn't measured by the comfort I gave Adam, but by the strength I could offer to anyone willing to respect it. On the way home, I stopped at the church. Father Thomas was standing near the steps, greeting parishioners as they left morning mass. I told him what I had done, about the tools and the apprentices. He listened carefully, then nodded. "Justice and love," he said again. "You've chosen both." Sometimes the best gift a parent can give is the freedom to stand without a crutch, even if it feels like cruelty at the time. His words echoed in me long after I left. For months, I had struggled with the question of whether I had abandoned Adam, but now I understood. Love is not meant to erase accountability. Love that destroys your dignity is not love, it is surrender. The hardest truth I had to learn was that my son's failures were not mine to absorb. They were his to carry, his to grow from, or not. At night, I often thought of the letter Adam had left under my door. I kept it in the drawer with old photographs, not because I wanted to reopen the wound, but because it reminded me of what was real. He had begged, yes, but he had also revealed the heart of the problem. He wanted my resources more than my presence. That was the difference between a bond of love and a bond of dependence. Slowly, my grief began to change shape. It no longer pressed down like iron, but instead softened into acceptance. I could not undo the past, but I could choose the future. I began taking long walks through the parks, feeling the sun warm my face after months of gray. I started planning small trips I had always postponed. Life stretched before me not as a void, but as open space waiting for me to claim it. When I looked back over the long road, I saw not a story of revenge, but a story of reclamation. I had spent years building scaffolding under someone who refused to stand on his own. In tearing that scaffolding away, I wasn't punishing. I was freeing myself from carrying what was never meant to be mine. I tell this not for pity nor for applause, but for anyone who finds themselves crushed under the weight of family duty that has turned to abuse. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are respect, for yourself and for others. To demand respect is not to reject love. It is to protect love from being twisted into something poisonous. As spring unfolded, I stood once more in my empty workshop. The shelves were bare now, the air still. I whispered aloud, "Seasons change, and so must we." The words felt final, yet freeing. I wasn't only a father, I was a man who had chosen dignity over convenience, self-respect over toxic love. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not to strike back, but to live well, to live free, to live in peace. That was the lesson I carried forward. That was the life I chose. Life has a way of revealing truths we often spend years trying to avoid. At its heart, this story is not simply about betrayal or rejection. It is about the journey to reclaim self-worth after years of sacrifice. For many, family is considered sacred, a bond meant to endure through every storm. Yet even sacred bonds can become chains when love is mistaken for obligation and respect is replaced with entitlement. The most profound lesson here lies in understanding that love without boundaries is not love at all. It is surrender. And surrender eventually corrodes both the giver and the receiver. There comes a point in every life where choices must be weighed not only for their impact on others, but also for the preservation of one's own dignity. Too often, people believe that enduring mistreatment in silence is a mark of virtue. They confuse patience with passivity, generosity with servitude. The truth is far simpler and far more difficult to embrace. To continue giving without reciprocity is to teach others that your worth is disposable. It may seem harsh to set limits, especially with those closest to you, but boundaries are not born from cruelty. They are born from respect. They are reminders that every person, regardless of role, deserves to be treated with dignity. The arc of this journey illustrates that silence in the face of exploitation is not kindness, but complicity. Years of sacrifice can vanish in a moment if they are received with contempt rather than gratitude. It is not wealth, status, or effort that truly matter. It is recognition of the humanity behind those acts of giving. When recognition is denied, when sacrifice is twisted into a weapon of manipulation, the only path forward is to step back. To walk away is not abandonment, it is the reclamation of one's own life. What follows such a decision is often misunderstood. Many think the end of a toxic bond means emptiness, but in truth it is space. Space where healing can begin. Space where identity is rediscovered. For the first time, the air feels lighter because it no longer carries the weight of false expectations. This space can be frightening, but it is also liberating. It offers the chance to redirect energy toward people, causes, and pursuits that value what is given. It transforms what was once wasted into seeds for a new future. The deeper message rests in how justice and love intertwine. Justice without compassion can harden the heart, yet compassion without justice allows destruction. True love, whether between parent and child, partners, or friends, cannot thrive without balance. To protect oneself is not to stop loving. It is to ensure that love remains pure rather than poisoned by resentment. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing someone to face the consequences of their own decisions. In doing so, one respects their ability to grow, even if it means watching from a distance. Equally important is the recognition that legacies are not defined by who betrays us, but by how we respond. One may spend decades pouring energy into ungrateful hands, only to find that those gifts vanish like water through open fingers. Yet if those same resources are redirected toward people who cherish them, students, neighbors, strangers in need, the impact becomes enduring. It is proof that worth is not tied to bloodlines or family names, but to the willingness to honor what is given. Ultimately, the lesson is universal. Life will always test the strength of our convictions, especially when those tests come cloaked in the faces of people we once trusted most. The question is not whether we will be hurt, but whether we will allow that hurt to define us. Dignity is the anchor that holds fast when storms arrive. Without it, even the strongest love becomes hollow. With it, even painful endings can transform into beginnings. The seasons themselves remind us of this truth. Winter gives way to spring, and what seemed lifeless reveals buds of renewal. Likewise, endings that feel devastating can open the path to growth. To choose dignity is to choose renewal, to allow the possibility of peace after conflict, and to claim freedom from cycles of manipulation. The greatest revenge, if one must call it that, is not to destroy those who wronged us, but to build a life where their power to wound no longer exists. And so, the story leaves us with a final truth. Respect yourself enough to walk away from what diminishes you. Love deeply, but never at the expense of your soul. Protect fiercely, but never so much that you lose yourself in the process. Seasons change, and so must we. The most powerful act any person can perform is to live free, to live well, and to live with dignity intact. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.